let me repeat very briefly what I said yesterday so that you may remember your questions. I keep repeating, if you have any questions yourself, go back to the basics, and almost certainly those questions will disappear. What are the basics? The basics are extremely simple. All there is consciousness. But consciousness has aspects. Consciousness can be at rest. Primal energy, potential energy, same thing. The scientists would prefer it to be called potential energy, or consciousness, or the source from which everything has come, the one without the second. So all there really is and always has been and always will be is the source, the one without the second. That is the primary concept. Having got it, we can forget about it. We can forget about it for this reason. As far as we are concerned, consciousness is in movement. Manifestation has arisen from the source. If the manifestation has arisen from the source, and the source has always been all there is, then obviously the source has not used any material outside of itself to produce the manifestation. So the source has produced the manifestation from within itself. And a beautiful example is given in the Hindu scriptures, and that is, he says, the manifestation, the source produces the manifestation like the spider produces the web without any materials from outside of itself. The spider produces the web from itself, and when it takes back into itself. That's an amazingly good simile. So consciousness at rest becomes consciousness in movement and produces the manifestation as its own expression or as its own appearance. Or you can say potential energy activizes itself. That is a better concept because the question mind asks, how does the manifestation arise? Why does the manifestation arise? Why does the manifestation arise? Because it is the nature of the potential to activize itself sometime. If the potential did not activize itself sometime, it wouldn't be potential. It would be dead matter. So it is the nature of the potential to activize itself sometime. And it activizes itself with an enormous, incredible, unimaginable amount of energy. What is generally known as the Big Bang. And when the tremendous energy produced by the Big Bang exhausts itself sometime, millions and millions of years later, the manifestation goes back into the potential. Until again, because it is the nature of the potential, activization happens again. So having used that concept, I keep saying, forget the source at rest. We are concerned with the consciousness in movement, manifestation. The functioning of manifestation is the life as we know it. So all our questions would be based on life as we know it, including the question of self-realization or enlightenment. So the question of enlightenment or self-realization only the individual human being is concerned. The animal is not concerned. It is the human being who is concerned with enlightenment or self-realization. Why is that? The seeking, therefore, according to my concept, which is the basic concept, the basic concept in life as we know it. As I said, having accepted that the consciousness in movement, the manifestation, is an expression of the consciousness at rest or potential energy, we better forget it. Because it's the same consciousness, it is the same energy. So the question now is, in life as we know it, what is my basic concept? In life as we know it, my basic concept is extraordinarily simple. The 4 words in the Bible. Thy will be done. Same thing in every religion. Same basic concept in every religion. And yet we have religious wars. Why? Because the basic concept is forgotten. And interpreters have interpreted, given their own interpretation to each religion. And the interpretations are concepts. And concepts are something which some people can accept, some people cannot accept. So concepts of one religion are not acceptable to concepts of another religion. Concepts of one sect in a religion are not acceptable to another sect in the same religion. So we have wars. So we have a war in Ireland, same Christian religion. So basically, concepts are not acceptable to one another because a concept is not the truth. So as I said yesterday, there is only one truth. Anything that any sage has said at any time, this becomes part of my basic concept. Anything any sage has said at any time, anything any scripture of any religion has said at any time is a concept. A concept being something which some people may accept, some people may not be able to accept, may want to accept but are not able to accept. So, the truth is only that which no one can deny. And I am speaking from the point of view, not consciousness at rest, we forget about it, but consciousness in movement, which is manifestation and its functioning, which is life as we know it. So, in life as we know it, is there any truth at all? Or is everything a concept? The answer is, there is a truth in life as we know it. And that is which no one can deny. An atheist may come to me and say, look, I've studied this subject for many years. I have a doctorate in comparative religions. And I am of the absolutely firm view that God does not exist. He is entitled to it because God is a concept. So my question to the atheist would be, God may or may not exist, but do you deny that you exist? Which the atheist cannot deny, and which no one can deny, that he exists. I am. I exist. And that I am, which no one can deny, is not a personal awareness of existing. Otherwise, they'd be different. And yet, each person says, I am, I exist. Therefore, that I am, which every person says, cannot be an individual awareness of existence, but necessarily has to be a universal or impersonal awareness of existence. That is the truth. I am. And every religion says the same thing. The truth is hidden or veiled by ignorance. What is the ignorance? The ignorance is that impersonal awareness of I am is covered or hidden by the personal awareness. I'm John, I'm Jane, I'm Michael, I'm Heiner, I'm Margaret. So, I am is the truth, I am John is ignorance. And it is this ignorance which causes one an enormous amount of pain. The amount of guilt an average person carries is truly enormous, with or without realizing it, only because of the ignorance. The ignorance being, I am a separate being. I exist separately. I do things. I am the creator of my actions. I am responsible for my actions. Deep down, from his own personal experience, every person knows it, that he is really not in control of his life. He decides to do one thing, something else happens. That's been life as we know it. And yet, deep down, he cannot forget the fact that he is a separate individual, in control of his life, responsible for his actions, which is generally what is known as the ego. The ego, from personal experience, knows generally that he or she is not in charge of his or her life. And yet he cannot get rid of the fact that he is in charge, he is in control, he is the doer. He or she is the doer. Now why is that? In other words, why has the ego come into existence, bringing with it a little happiness and a great deal of unhappiness? Obviously, where did the ego come from? Obviously, again, where could the ego have come from except from the source? Where could the ego have come from except from the source? In other words, the source has created the ignorance. The source has created the ego. The source has created the source of unhappiness. So why has the source created the ego? The source has created the ego out of what I call divine hypnosis. The ego knows from personal experience that he is truly not in control, and yet he finds it impossible to give up the idea that he is not the doer, that he is not the doer. He thinks he is the doer. So this is the hypnosis. It is the divine hypnosis by which the source has created the ego. And whether you call the source, or primal energy, or potential energy, or consciousness, or awareness, or simply God makes no difference, so long it is never forgotten that all these words, including God, refers to the source. The word God can create a certain misunderstanding, because God is generally understood as an entity concerned with the manifestation, all powerful, all knowing, all merciful. Nonetheless, an entity connected with the manifestation, an entity which came into existence only with the manifestation. That is not my meaning of the word God when I keep using God. But God is used in the sense of the source. And when that is understood, the question, why did God create disease and wars, will not arise. The question arises, why did God create disabled children, handicapped children? Why did God create disease? The question arises because that mind intellect which has created the God, the concept of God, has given it attributes. The same intellect which has created the concept of God says God is all-powerful, God is all-knowing, God is all-merciful. God never told anybody He is merciful. You say, God, you are merciful, and then you ask Him, God, why did you create disease and handicapped children? So if we understand by the word God the source, then it is easy to understand that in the manifestation and its functioning is based on duality. Duality means opposites. And opposites mean health and disease, war and peace, male and female, without which the manifestation and its functioning cannot happen. So the manifestation and its functioning is based on duality, opposites. And in the opposites, human relationships have to happen. For life as we know it to happen, interhuman relationships between individuals who consider themselves each an individual entity, there are interhuman relationships. Friendship and enmity, love and hate, without which life as we know it wouldn't exist. So for interhuman relationships to exist, for life as we know it to exist, the source had to create egos. So the source created the egos. And the ego says, I am seeking enlightenment. So my basic concept is, the ego is a mere divine hypnosis, a creation of the hypnosis, a fiction, created so that life as we know it could happen. So my basic concept is, one of my basic concepts is, that God simply had to create egos for life as we know it to happen, for the Hindu Leela to happen, the game of God to happen, the functioning of manifestation to happen. And when God created the egos in every human body, mind, organism, the same source also started the process of demolishing the ego in a certain limited number of cases. I mean, there was no sense in God creating the egos and destroying all of them. That even an idiot wouldn't do. So, what God did start as part of life, mind you, I keep saying, as part of life as we know it. What God did create is the egos in every human being, human body, mind, organism, and at the same time started the process of destroying the egos in a limited number of cases. There is a verse in the Bhagavad-Gita where Lord Krishna says, out of thousands of people, there is only one seeker, spiritual seeker. And out of the thousands of seekers, hardly one knows me in principle. I repeat, out of thousands people, there is one seeker. And out of thousands of seekers, hardly one knows me in principle. My interpretation, my conceptual interpretation, let me make it perfectly clear, is very simple. My conceptual interpretation of this is that the thousands of seekers who are again created by the ego, by the source. How does the source create a seeker? Out of thousands of people, there is a seeker. How does that happen? That happens because the seeker, in creating the human being, has created the human being, again my concept, as a uniquely programmed instrument or computer, through which he can produce such actions or deeds as he wants. And that individual, unique human instrument or computer, some limited number of these human programmed computers have been so programmed by the source that this kind of seeking can happen. So, the seekers happen because the source has created certain body-mind organisms with such a unique programming that this kind of seeking will happen. In other words, basically what I am saying is, there never has been a seeker. There never has been a seeker after enlightenment. There never has been a seeker after money. There never has been a seeker after fame. There never has been a seeker after power. What has been happening actually as part of life, as part of the functioning of manifestation, is that seeking of various kinds have been happening. So, we say so and so seeks money. There is a seeker after money. My interpretation of that is this: there is no seeker after money, but the source has created a body-mind organism with such programming that seeking money has to happen. Or there is another group of body-mind organisms which are so programmed that seeking fame happens in many fields. We have Agassiz and Samprases wanting fame in tennis. We have Tiger Woods and various other people seeking fame on the golf course. We have seekers after fame in every field, in science, arts, dancing, music. In every field, there are seekers seeking fame almost to the exclusion of everything else. That money goes with the fame is one thing. But if a body-mind organism is programmed to seek fame, then even if money didn't come, seeking fame would happen. So my point is, I repeat, according to my concept, there never has been a seeker. Neither seeker after money, nor seeker after fame, nor seeker after enlightenment. So the seeking after enlightenment has happened because in those limited number of body-mind organisms, seeking after enlightenment has to be because they are programmed in that manner. And those seekers continue to think that they are seeking enlightenment. Now I'm trying to interpret Lord Krishna's verse. Among thousands, there is one seeker. Among thousands of seekers, there is hardly one who knows me in principle. My interpretation of that is this. The seeking begins with the seeker thinking he is seeking enlightenment. Those are the thousands of seekers doing various sadhanas. As Wayne mentioned last evening, someone came to me in one of the visitors and says, "What did I think of meditation?" So we talked. He could hardly wait for an answer. Before he told me, "Do you know how long I meditate, Ramesh?" I said, "No, sir." She said, 16 hours a day. And I've never seen such pride in any statement. I meditate 16 hours a day. Of course, I didn't have to ask him what he does for a living. You see, I meditate 16 hours a day. Those are the thousands of seekers Lord Krishna is talking about. Seekers proud of the sadhana they do. You see? And out of those thousands of seekers who do various kinds of sadhanas, and always wondering if there is someone doing better sadhana or longer sadhana or deeper sadhana than he does. And out of those, suddenly, again, because it is God's will, my primary concept, never forget. Out of these thousands of seekers who believe that they are doing the seeking, because it is God's will and the destiny of that body-mind organism, for some reason or other, the understanding happens that he has never been the seeker. He never decided at any time to seek enlightenment or whatever it is. In fact, I don't know what enlightenment is. How could I seek enlightenment? So this spiritual seeking has begun, and I had nothing to do with it. So if I had nothing to do with this beginning of the seeking, why should I bother with the progress of it? That power which started the seeking, let that power continue with the seeking. You see? That is the one who knows me in principle. So, according to my concept, seeking begins with a seeker seeking enlightenment as an object which would give him or her more pleasure in the world than any material possessions have given him. And the seeking ends only with the realization or the unconditional acceptance that he has never been the seeker, that the seeking is happening as a matter of God's will. And therefore the seeking can end only with the will of God. And the seeking truly ends with the realization that there never has been a seeker. There never has been a doer. Doing has been happening. Lord Buddha put it very succinctly and very clearly. He said, events happen. Deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof. That's it. Events happen, deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof. Along with that comes another sentence. There is no soul, therefore there is no transmigration of souls. You see, one takes care of the spiritual seeking, and the other takes care of reincarnation. But not many have accepted, not many Buddhists have accepted this reported saying of Buddha. If you ask me, where did he say it? I wouldn't know. But someone did some research and sent me that it is contained in some stotra in Sri Lankan, something like that. I don't know. But frankly, I'm not concerned with the source of that. Those words are the most acceptable to me. And that is what explains the seeking. So, what is based on the core of the problem is this: thy will be done. Same words are in the Muslim, apart from inshallah. Same thing in the Hindu religion. You are the creator, you are the enjoyer. And if that is accepted, then the question of individual doing would not arise. But that's not easy. Why? Because of divine hypnosis. But basically, that is what it is. Nothing happens unless it is the will of God. If that is acceptable, therefore I say if the questions arise, go back to the basics. That means there is no individual doer. If there is no individual doer, how does life happen? That is the mind intellect. If I don't do my actions, and if I am not responsible for my actions, how can life go on? If everybody considers that they are not his actions, how can life go on? So, the question of free will is most important. So, basically, is there free will or is there no free will? You see? From what I have said so far, you would expect me to say, all there is God's will. Therefore, there is truly no individual free will. But I say you have free will. How do I settle with this contradiction? If thy will prevails, then how can my will prevail? Now, this question arises because of the interpretation of the word free will. What is free will? I think you will all agree that what you mean by free will is free will to make a decision. If there are alternatives, it is my free will to make a choice between alternative A, B or C. It is my will to choose, to make a choice, to make a decision. Isn't that what is meant by free will? Is there any other interpretation of free will? Please. As I see it, free will means I have the freedom to make a choice, to make a decision. Other than that, is there any other way you interpret free will? If that is the interpretation of free will, I say you do have free will. You see? You do have free will to make a choice. Having made the choice, your free will is ended. You make a choice. That's it. You have used your free will. Nothing prevents you, nothing stops you from making your choice, from making your decision. But having made the decision, is anything else in your control? You see? That is why I say God's will prevails thereafter. Do you or do you not have a choice? Yes, you do. Do you or do you not have free will? You do. You do have free will to make a choice. But there your free will stops. And God's will prevails. Whether that choice will turn into an action, what consequences that action will have, not in your control. But I repeat, that does not mean that you do not have the free will to make a choice. You do have free will to make a choice. But there your free will ends. Yes?
But is it my will when I make a choice, or is it also God's will who just expresses itself? Okay, excuse me. Is it really my will when I make a choice?
Yes.
Or is it as well God who makes me think that I'm the one who's choosing?
You tell me.
What I feel that
Yes.
that I'm doubting this case of free will, because in a situation A or B, if I make the decision often in my life, I think, why do I make this decision? It seems like something is forcing me to make this decision, even if everything is against it. So there's also like God who makes me think that I want or I'm choosing. This is what I experienced so far, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'm doubting this free will, the way you expressed it.
What you are then saying is,
Yes.
you think you have free will, but that free will is counterfeit.
Excuse me, the last, I didn't understand.
Let me tell you. You know, supposing you go hunting in your attic, an old house, and you come across a bundle of money. It is a bundle of currency notes. Do you have a bundle of currency notes or not? You do. You do have the bundle of currency notes. Then you go out and try to cash it, and you say it's counterfeit. It is counterfeit. Do you or do you not have a bundle of notes? You do. Do you or do you not have free will? You do. Analyze it, and what do you find? It's counterfeit. You see? It is counterfeit. Why is it counterfeit? It's counterfeit for this reason. On what basis do you make a decision? On what basis do you make a choice? The basis of that is the programming in the body-mind organism. The programming includes tremendous lot of conditioning. What is it that makes you say, I shall decide this? Why? Because the other one is wrong. And what is that wrongness of that decision based on? Your conditioning. You see? So even that decision which you make of your free will is based on the programming. And who did the programming? God did the programming. You see? So, there is free will, there is money, there is a bundle of money, but that bundle of money is counterfeit.
Okay, that's
So this free will which you do have is counterfeit. You make a decision, you don't know whether that decision will turn into an action. Because I told you that free will ends when you make a decision. After that, you don't know whether that decision will turn into an action. You don't know what consequences that action will have. You see? Yes.
Thank you.
But does this mean that there is no use to hesitate between one decision and the other?
I'm sorry, please.
Does it mean that there is no use to hesitate?
Does it mean?
There is no use to hesitate between one decision and the other? Is it the same what you decide at the end? Between A and B?
Yes. There is hesitation in choosing.
She's saying there's no reason to hesitate.
There is no reason to hesitate. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Well, you see, whether there is reason to hesitate or not is also based on the programming. Therefore, someone says, I don't know why people bother about, I make a decision straight away. And I hate to see my assistants dithering. You see, that the chief executive, in fact, was risen to be chief executive because he's used to making decisions. And he makes decisions quickly because he is able to analyze the problem first. Having analyzed the problem, he makes a decision. There is a book written many years ago by the chairman or vice chairman of a hiring company, which was the second, not Avil, I think, Avis is the number one. I forget the name, who is the second one. This man has written a book, beautiful book, on management. And he says, I find that almost 50% of my decisions are wrong. But as soon as I come to know that the decision is wrong, I accept it as a wrong decision and make amends. So this way, his point is he makes a decision, and whether you are able to make the decision or not is itself part of the programming. You see? Therefore you find some people just cannot make a decision and are forced to resort to tossing a coin. And there are others, who quickly see the nature of the problem and therefore are able to decide. My son, younger son, the living son, my older one died. This younger son has always been like that. Ever since he was 2.5, 3 years old. And there was an incident, I think, which suddenly made him realize it. What he did was, he wanted to go and buy something. just down the road, and he was only 2.5, 3 years old. So I said, this is what I have. Is that what you want? So they said, this is what costs 3 rupees. So he went down the road. He found that there were two things. One was 3 and the other was 3.5. Only 2.5, 3 years old, you see. So he came back and he said, this was the problem. I didn't buy it. So now all I told him was, you see, it was 3 rupees or 3.5 rupees. Even if you had bought the 3.5 rupees, see, what you were afraid of was that I might scold you. Why did you pay 8 annas more, half a rupee more? On the other hand, now you have neither. Do you know, he looked at me for quite some time. It was such a simple thing. Why did I not make a decision? And I think honestly from that time, which is conditioning, make no mistake, that was a conditioning at that moment. He has always been able to make a decision. See? I'll tell you the same boy, an year later, about when he was 3.5, he used to love to be rocked, you know, that as babies do, children do. Take them on your lap and you rock them. He loved to be rocked. And anybody, any older people, knowing it, would take him and rock him. Once, my wife and my children were going to a place called Bangalore. On the way was a place called Hubli, and where the train stopped for 4 hours. And at Hubli, I had an uncle who was almost blind. So anybody in the family passing through that would go and visit him. So we visited him. And at my uncle's place, there was his wife and his wife's cousin or aunt or someone. So there were 2 ladies. And of course, it was well known about Shivdas's love to be rocked. So almost all the 4 hours there, one or the other lady would rock him, you see, and he was delighted. Then we came to the train on our way to Bangalore. And one of the ladies told Shivdas, he said, Shivdas, you are now going to Bangalore. Whom will we rock? And do you know, he sat up and said, yes. I mean, didn't say, but you could see the wheels working. He said, yes, this is a problem. So, first thing is, he realized there was a problem. And you wouldn't believe it. Just like that, he found a solution. Oh, he said, you rock her and you rock her. Problem solved. Since then, he's been like that. So he did very well in his career. He became the managing director of the company he joined after 20 years. Then the company merged with some other company. He made a decision. Within a week, he gave up the job. And of course, he had a good golden handshake. Meaning, he was a very good chief executive. So they gave him a good settlement, retirement settlement. And after that, he started as a management consultant. And his card reads, Consultant Managerial Efficiency. So he's doing very well there too. Yes. Yes.
Yes. In the Dzogchen Buddhist, or in a certain place in Buddhism,
Yes.
they, as you know, they study the nature of the mind, how the mind works, and they say that the mind is self-liberating. When you leave it as it is, and you see things as they are, and you accept them as they are, the nature of the mind is that it just keeps moving, as you say, that there is no obstacles, and the flow goes on created by this universal consciousness. However, they also say that when you recognize, and all you have to do is recognize the program. That is
All you have to do
and you could say that's God's will. Some people are destined
Yes.
to recognize their program.
Yes.
In that moment of recognition, there
Yes.
is the freedom. There is the free will functioning. But you must recognize the programming. All you have to do is see it. See how you're doing it. See how it's doing itself.
Yes.
And you're doing it to you.
Yes.
That is the moment of liberation. And does that concur with how you're teaching? Is that the same as what you're
No,
saying?
wait a minute. You are saying all you have to do.
Yeah, I'm saying it is divine will, but your part in that play, in that lila.
No, all I'm saying is you will be able to do it only if it is God's will.
Yes.
If it is God's will that you do not do it, you will not be aware,
Right.
or you will not be able to be mindful.
I understand that, but I'm asking when you do, however it happens, that it happens, that recognition of the programming takes place, would you say those are the moments of free will? Those are the moments of freedom?
Those are the moments of freedom, not free will. Those are the moments of freedom which happen if it is God's will. Though, I repeat, those are the moments of freedom which happen if it is God's will. And those are the moments of freedom which you are able to recollect in those times when there are no moments of freedom. And the ego says, those moments of freedom were wonderful. I must have more of them. So the ego asks the master, how do I get more of them? Forgetting that those original moments of freedom happened because it was God's will. And those moments of freedom were not earned by the ego. See?
I have one last question. Coming from the psychology, the Western psychology tradition, is there any point in your teaching for psychology?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Do you see any importance to psychology in the realm of human suffering?
You see, psychology is something which exists. So, psychology would not have been there unless it was God's will. There is disease, therefore there are physicians. There are mental disturbances, therefore there are psychotherapists. And there are psychologists. Something needed, God has provided the alternative, because the functioning of manifestation is based on opposites. You see, beginning with Adam and Eve. Opposites. Male and female, Adam and Eve. Having said Adam and Eve, let me tell you a joke about Adam and Eve. Adam was delighted to have Eve as a companion. So he said, Lord, thank you so much for giving me Eve. But tell me, why have you made her so beautiful and lovely? So the Lord says, so that, my son, you may love her. And why have you made her so compassionate and considerate? So the Lord says, so that, my son, you may love her. Then he said, but God, why have you made her so stupid? So the Lord said, so that she may love you. But God has somehow felt it necessary to remove that stupidity. And now Eve says, you are a male chauvinist. Please.
I enjoy very much the relaxation which your teaching brings. For me, there is no need to do really an effort, or it's not me anyway. From the other hand, the question which is always coming is why different enlightened beings stress also the use of sadhana. I mean, it's the same truth. They must know the same truth, and still there are many paths. I mean, I'm an Osho sannyasin, and
I see.
also Osho, you know, he stressed awareness and meditations, and
Yes.
this is a conflict inside. I have difficulties. I enjoy the ideas or the
Yes.
concepts, but I
Yes.
have difficulties really believing or accepting them.
Now, your question, correct me if I'm wrong, but your question is basically, should you or should you not meditate? Is that your basic question?
Meditate or do any kind of...
Whatever. But the basic question is, should a meditator meditate or not? That is the basic question, isn't it? And my answer is extraordinarily simple. If you like meditating, meditate. But don't expect anything out of it. If you expect anything out of it, then there is a meditator doing the meditation with an expectation. And so long as this triad is there, meditator meditating with an expectation, according to me, that is not true meditation. True meditation is when meditation happens and those moments of freedom happen. You see, those moments of freedom which your neighbor said happen when meditation happens. And meditation happens when there is no me expecting anything, which is again the will of God. So it is the grace of God that meditation happens and brings about those moments of freedom. You see? So when those moments of freedom arise or happen, then the ego comes in and says, I want more of those. But if those moments of freedom, when they happen, are accepted gratefully as the gift of God, then the ego doesn't come in. You see? And there is more likelihood of those moments of freedom happening more frequently and for longer time. Because it is the me, the doer, who is always the obstruction. Indrani, after that, this lady here. Yes.
Ramesh, for a while I experienced freedom in the form of there's no interference in what was happening. A lot of feelings were felt and there was no interference. And suddenly, the reference points that I had to even awareness were seen to be, I recognised that everything was actually just phenomena, and it really freaked me out.
Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
About a month ago,
Yes.
I realised that the references I had,
The resonance, that,
references to refer to,
the references.
Yeah.
Yes.
to awareness of what was happening as awareness to what I felt was freedom, was no longer available to me.
Yes.
There seem to be like an annihilation of references, and it really freaked me out. On one hand, it felt very freeing. On another hand, there was a realization that all of it, even the references to freedom, even freedom as I thought was there, was all just phenomena arising. And I want some kind of clarification I'm not sure about, but since then there has been a great disturbance and an inability to be able to refer to anything that was before that. Does that make sense? Anyway, I can go on because since...
Yes, but
Yeah.
can you come to a question?
What the hell's going on?
I mean, let me...
Yeah.
I mean, am I right in saying that what you're trying to say is that sometimes the understanding happens and sometimes the understanding is covered by problems? Is that what you're saying? Sometimes the understanding is there, sometimes the understanding is not there. Is that what you're saying? The understanding...
What happened is the understanding...
The understanding meaning the moments of freedom. What the understanding brings are moments of freedom, which when they don't happen, the understanding is not there. So is that what you're saying? A flip-flop happens. Sometimes the understanding, sometimes lack of understanding. A flip-flop happens. Is that what you're saying? And you don't want that flip-flop. That's what you're saying, isn't it? A flip-flop happens, and
what
I
happened
don't
is the
want that
flip-flop
flip-flop.
began again after a long time of just being with what was. Yeah.
Yes.
So the flip-flop began again.
So, the flip-flop happens because it is supposed to happen. No way you can do anything about it. That is basic concept. I say go back, if you have a problem, go back to the basics. So this is a problem. So what is the basic? Thy will be done. So if it is His will that flip-flops must happen, accept the flip-flops. Accept that they are there. And they will stop or become less if it is God's will. You see? The individual wanting is always, every time, the obstacle. But if it is accepted that whatever is, unwanted though it be, is God's will, then you accept even the unwanted. You accept the flip-flops and say, all right, this time the flip-flops are there. And sometime the flip-flops will disappear. Nothing remains forever. You see? Everything changes. Many years ago, when I was 12 years old, I went to a movie. It was something about fencing. I forget everything about that movie except one thing. In that movie, the central character was a count. He has a huge mansion with a huge fireplace. And on top of that fireplace was a large shield which gave the family motto, "This too will pass." 12 years now, 70 years ago, that I still remember. The huge shield, "This too will pass." You see? So it's a good thing to remember. This too will pass.
I have the question
Yeah.
whether it is possible that there are conflicts and wars between enlightened human beings.
Yes, now look, the wars between enlightened human beings. How do you mean? Wars between two enlightened human beings?
Or maybe one war.
I mean, is your question really, why should a war happen at all?
Yes.
Is that your basic question?
I mean,
Or you mean,
if the world If there are only enlightened humans,
There are religious wars now. There are religious wars happening now. But they are not religious wars between enlightened beings.
so it's not possible.
They may be wars between individuals who think they are enlightened beings.
Yeah.
You see?
So, if we live in a world where everybody would be enlightened, there would be no war, no conflict.
Then it would not be life as we know it. Then it would not be life as we know it.
And how would be the life then?
Life would be, what is life as we know it based on, as I said, interhuman relationships. Interhuman relationships of friendship and enmity, love and hate. So if love and hate and friendship and enmity don't happen, anybody can have anybody's wife. No problem. Can you imagine a world like that? Life as we know it? Oh, you want my wife? Take her. So then, life as we know it wouldn't happen. So, for life as we know it to happen, interhuman relationships have to be there. And for interhuman relationships to be there, the personal sense of doership and ownership and doership, this personal entity has to be there. And if the personal sense of doership is there, enlightenment cannot happen.
So another question, in these years there are more and more persons who become enlightened, and it seems that it will...
Yes, but you see, there are more and more people where enlightenment or the understanding happens.
Yes.
But the proportion is still higher. The world population is increasing. So, what Lord Krishna, among thousands of people, there is one seeker. Among thousands of seekers, there is one who knows me in principle. Same thing would hold good.
So this world basically would not change, it will continue.
That
like Krishna
basically life as we know it is not likely to change.
So we would not enter another yuga, another...
I beg pardon?
We would not have a world free of problems or...
Goodness. Did you say goodness?
Yes, yeah.
Well, would you call anything goodness if there were no evil? If there were no opposite, what would you call goodness? Can there be any goodness without its opposite? Goodness exists because there is the opposite. Otherwise, goodness has no meaning. You see? Beauty would have no meaning unless there is ugliness. You see? So goodness will have no meaning unless there is its opposite also exists. That's what I mean. In life as we know it, in the function, a basis is opposites. You see, until last year, we had a body-mind organism called Mother Teresa. Which body-mind organism was so programmed that only good deeds happen. So the happening of the good deeds was the destiny of that body-mind organism called Mother Teresa, for which the programming was appropriate. And the happening of the good deeds was the destiny of that body-mind organism according to the will of God. And the consequences of those actions, good deeds, was also God's will and the destiny of that body-mind organism called Mother Teresa. Nobel Prize, awards, rewards, publicity, all that was also God's will and the destiny of that body-mind organism. On the other hand, there must have been several body-mind organisms called psychopaths. A psychopathic organism so programmed that only what the society and the law called evil, perverted deeds happen. So the happening of the evil, perverted deeds was the destiny of that body-mind organism called a psychopathic organism. And the consequences, being executed, or put in jail, or put in asylum, were also the destiny of the same body-mind organism. And both body-mind organisms, on the one hand, one extreme, Mother Teresa, on the other extreme, a psychopathic organism. Both were created by the same source as the opposites in life as we know it. So the basis of life as we know it are opposites, good and evil. You see?
Okay.
So the individual becomes only unhappy because he chooses one against the other, instead of accepting that life as we know it is based on opposites. Unhappiness occurs because the ego selects one against the other and does not accept both.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Most welcome.
But if this is right, what is about the thing with changing? Let's say there's a development for this psychopathic man or woman, and he makes up his mind and personally decides to change his mind. What about these decisions?
Can you say that again, please?
Well, since yesterday, I have the main problem with this, all is God's will.
Yes.
And I'm very thankfully that you said I have a choice, because I had discussions yesterday.
Certainly.
That I had a choice. Well, that's
You
nice.
have the free will to make a choice.
Okay, thank you so much
Sure.
to hear that.
I still hold on to it.
Wow.
You have the free will to make a choice.
Okay, I hear this and I'm very thankful for that.
You brought up this point yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, with
Yes.
Wayne.
So I wanted to make you happy. So I said, bring up the point tomorrow morning. You do have the free will to make a choice.
Okay. And now I have another question to this complex.
But why not proceed with this question? What is that free will worth to you, my friend? Ebert, is that your name? Ebert?
Herbert, yeah. Herbert.
Herbert, yes.
Well, I'm here to hear for something you called in the beginning first time about the truth, and everything as far as I can feel and know is that sometimes I have a free will. I can make a decision. So if somebody says up there, you have no decision, you have no free will,
Yes.
and then for me the concept is wrong.
Quite right. I agree. That's what I told you. You do have the free will to make a choice.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
But having made the choice, your free will stops.
Oh, as long as my free will is...
Enough to make a choice. You are happy. Be happy. You said you had another question, please.
Yes, but the question is,
Yes.
If there is something developing or something is changing in me because of, we call in German Einsicht,
Yes.
or something like which is arranging in the mind.
Yes.
So I make up my mind to change away or to make not one decision but another decision.
Yes.
There's a saying in German, things are happening, but the deeds of the people are on the other hand. Also die Dinge ereignen sich, aber die Taten der sterblichen Menschen fallen auf die ein oder andere Seite ins Gewicht. I can translate it in English.
Look, would you like to say that in German, and Henning can translate? If it will flow more easily in German, please say it in German. Then Henning.
I just want one thing I can't explain in English. There's an impression, for me it's very true, and this says in German, die Dinge ereignen sich, es gibt ewig die Gegensätze, opposite. Aber die Taten der sterblichen Menschen fallen auf fallen eben auf die ein oder andere Weise ins Gewicht.
Prove their weight, they will have consequences.
Yeah. So, wait a minute. Are you saying then that you have the free will to change your decision? Is that what you're saying? Of course you have.
But if everything is determined, how can I have? I can't get this point.
You see, it's this way. You make a decision. Even the making of that decision is God's will. If you want to change the decision, that also happens to be God's will. But you are not prevented from making a decision. It is your free will to make a decision. And also it is your free will to change that decision. So the making a decision and changing the decision is still your free will. But my main point, Herbert, is this. Having made a decision, your free will stops. Then the later on is another decision. Where also you have the free will.
No, but that's not right. As I'd made a decision, and things develop as I prefer that the things shall develop.
Now, wait a
so
minute.
as long as I agree,
Yes.
my free will is becoming a manifestation.
Now, wait a minute. You make a decision.
Okay.
And things developed which necessitated your revising the decision. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yes.
You made a decision. Then things developed which necessitated your changing your decision. So the development of the subsequent events was not in your control.
That's not right. I mean, that's not, as far as I made a decision and pointed out several things and say, if I decide on this point and on this point and on this point, I can preview that things will develop in that way and in that way and in that way. And as long as this happens, my free will is become manifestation.
Wait a minute, you have said it. As long as they happen. As long as they happen.
And if they don't happen, I have to make new decisions to make them happen again.
So, your changing the decision depends on things happening over which you have no control.
But then I'm not out of responsibility. I'm not out of having ideas and take care that they come true.
Wait a minute,
I'm not
Herbert.
out of anything.
Wait a minute, Herbert. You are not out of the happening of things. You are not. You are part of that. How can you be out of it? You are part. Everybody is a part of things happening all the time. Nobody can be out of things happening. Everybody is an integral part of the functioning of manifestation of life as we know it. You see? So something happens because, as I say, it is God's will. Now, how that event affects whom will depend on the destiny of those who are concerned. An event happens. It's good for one, not good for another. Same event. It is good for some individual or a group of people. The same event is not good for another individual or a group of individuals. So how that event affects whom will depend on the destiny of that individual or that group.
I can make the decision. If I decide something which
Yes.
I know which is good for this man and bad for this man, I know it. When I decide it,
Yes.
what is that then?
You see, when you decide, has it been your experience, Herbert, that every decision of yours has been turned into action? And the consequences have been exactly as you had anticipated. Is that your experience, truly?
Yes, it is.
It is.
It is, yes.
Every decision.
Not every, but...
That
No,
is my point.
Not every, but...
So...
I'm working on exactly this job. I'm making decisions and things come true.
Yes. So, my interpretation of this, not every decision, but some decisions. Is that right? Then, some of those decisions where they turned out as you wanted, in those decisions, your will coincided with God's will. In those many cases where your will did not turn out, your will was against God's will. So if your will coincides with God's will, they will happen. If your will does not coincide with God's will, they will not happen. And it is quite possible that your will coincides with God's will to a certain percentage. They may be high in your case, low in my case.
Ramesh, you asked me to bring up a question from yesterday.
Bhakti. Is that it? Bhakti?
What?
Is that what you want? Anyway, I'm sorry. Yes, please go on.
But I'm not. It's completely changed for me today, so I'm not sure if. Do you still want me to bring it up, or?
So, you would rather not bring it up? Don't.
All what's happened today is when there is an obstruction, that's when there's a question arising.
That is right. Because who asks the question? It is the ego asking the question. And if you go back to the basics, my suggestion is that that question will almost certainly dissolve into nothing.
Yeah.
And the basic, as I told you, nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. That is the basic. Nothing in life can happen unless it is the will of God. You see, some time ago, some 2, 3, 4 months ago in India, there was a very, very sad case of a Christian social worker called Haynes and his 2 sons were locked up in a car, and some extremists put them to fire. So one religious social worker and 2 sons They were murdered, brutally murdered. You see? And the next day, the widow with a young daughter comes out with a statement which moved me enormously. The widow, who would normally have said, you must find out the people who did it, punish them. That would be the normal reaction, wouldn't it, of a grieving widow. You must find out these culprits and hang them. But do you know what she said? She said, their lifespan allotted by God was over. Their lifespan, as allotted by God, was over. I was so moved by that depth of understanding. You see? To be able to accept her own husband's and 2 children's death by a brutal manner was acceptable. Not that she was not grieving, but it was acceptable as the will of God. So, it may be the question, grieving did arise. But obviously she went to the basics and said, nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. So if something happened, it could only have happened because it was the will of God. That is what I mean by going back to the basics. In life, my basic point, nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. The ego resists it. Resists going back to the basics and therefore becomes unhappy. So did you want to ask a question now? You wanted to make a statement? Some comment?
Oh, I just wanted to, because you asked me to bring up the question from yesterday, so nothing.
Nice. Yes, this.
I want to know if we can understand and experience God's will only by understanding and living and seeing that which is happening, or if we have a chance to understand it before anything is happening.
Is your question really, how can this acceptance of God's will happen? Is that your question? How can this acceptance of God's will happen? Is that your question? No, you said. My interpretation of your question was, I would like to be able to accept this concept of nothing can happen unless it is God's will, but I can't. How can I do that? Is that your question?
No, I can.
Oh, you can. I see.
Can.
Yes, and then?
I thought that I remembered from yesterday, but I was not quite sure, that you said to somebody else, by no means can we understand or know God's will or experience God's will. We as human beings, we have no chance to understand Him as we understand perhaps our own mind. And I wanted to hear that again. Or whatever.
No, you see, there are 2 aspects of this point that you have brought up. One is being able to accept the concept that nothing happens unless it is God's will. That is one aspect. And that again, that acceptance itself, that acceptance, being able to accept that nothing happens unless it is God's will, itself is not in your control. That itself can happen if it is God's will. That is one aspect. The other aspect is, how can I understand what is God's will? That is the other aspect, which the mind asks. I would like to do what God wants me to do. I would not like to go against God's will. How can I know God's will? Is that what the point you are referring to? How can I know what is God's will? Is that your question?
No. My question.
I mean, again in German, then
What I was asking myself is,
Yes.
can I experience God? Can I know who is God? Who is the source?
same thing.
Besides,
In other words, what you are saying is, can I know the will of this all-powerful source? How can I know the will of the all-powerful source? That's what I said. That is the question, isn't it? How can I know what he wants done?
but the source is not only will. I mean, the source is the source, and the will of the source
Yes.
is not the whole source.
You see, the will of the source, my point is nothing can happen. You see, when I say nothing can happen, it is only from the point of view of the individual. Because the individual doesn't know what is going to happen. But what is going to happen from the point of view of the individual has already happened from the point of view of God. The whole, you see, what I'm saying is, the whole life as we know it, in this appearance of manifestation and its functioning, from beginning to end, is already there. My concept is this. It is a movie already done. The movie the story is written by the source. The source has done the script. The story, the source has produced the movie. The source has directed the movie. The source is playing every character in the movie. I repeat, the source is playing every character in the movie, and the source is witnessing the movie. You see? And the individual characters, which we are, which is played by the source, we think we are acting. We are in control of our lives. And we want to know. And we complain that the movie is not good enough. I would have made a much better movie, and becomes unhappy. But the fact is, the movie is already there. You see, in the Bhagavad-Gita, you have heard of the Bhagavad-Gita? The basis of the Bhagavad-Gita is, as you probably know, Arjuna, the warrior. You see, the earlier basis is this. Lord Krishna was a powerful entity at the time. So the two enemies, Arjuna and his cousin Duryodhana, both of them wanted Krishna's help. So Arjuna arrived at Krishna's place, saw him lying down asleep on his couch. So he sat at his feet on the floor. Then Duryodhana came. He also saw that Krishna was asleep. So he sat by his side. Both of them were there. But when Krishna awoke, He saw Arjuna first at his feet. And then he saw Duryodhana. But both wanted his help. So Krishna said, I would like to help you both. So you choose. On the one side, my entire army. On the other side, me alone, not fighting. On the one side, my entire army. On the other, me alone, not fighting. And both made their choices quickly. Arjuna said, I'll accept you, even if you don't fight. And Duryodhana said, I'll accept your forces, your army. So, Lord Krishna had promised not to take part in the war, not to fight. So, he became Arjuna's charioteer. And he took his chariot, Arjuna's chariot, to the forefront. And that is how the Bhagavad-Gita begins. Arjuna sees before him, arraigned as his enemies, not only his cousins and friends, but even his preceptors. So, he puts his bow down and tells Krishna, I can't kill my preceptors. I may kill my relatives and cousins, but I can't kill my preceptors. I can't kill my gurus. And he puts that is the beginning of the Bhagavad-Gita. And the entire Bhagavad-Gita is the attempt on the part of Lord Krishna to bring knowledge to Arjuna. So at one point, he tells Arjuna, even if you decide not to fight, these people arraigned there as your enemies are not going to survive. Even if you decide not to fight, these people arraigned as your enemies are not going to live. Why? He said, because as time, I have already killed them. In specific, I have already killed them. You don't know because you see only the present time. And he, as God, sees the entire eternity. He says, I, as time, have already killed them. You can only be the apparent instrument through which their deaths will occur. And further he says, even if you decide not to fight, after all I have said, then that decision will be futile. Even if you decide not to fight, that decision will be futile. Why? Because your programming as a warrior will make you fight. You were born a warrior. You have to be trained and conditioned to be a warrior. And your body will fight. So he said that decision will be futile. Your nature or your programming will make you fight. You see? This is, I have already killed them. The movie is already there. Yes.
What happens?
Shall we make that the last question, please? Yes, this morning, I mean.
What happens when a human being dies?
Yes. What happens? I don't know. But if you ask me, what do I think? What is my concept? My concept is the simplest possible. The body dies, the air within the body mixes with the air outside, and the consciousness trapped into this body mixes with the consciousness outside. Are you talking of reincarnation?
Maybe.
All right. Now, reincarnation. What would you say is the basis of reincarnation or rebirth? Let's say rebirth. Incarnation is too fancy a word. Let us say rebirth. What is the basis of rebirth? Your actions in the past life have influenced your life in this life. And what you do in this life will affect your life in the next life. That is the basis, isn't it, of rebirth? Rebirth is based on your individual actions. A friend of mine, in fact, is Heiner. He wanted to interview Dalai Lama. So he rang up his secretary. And the secretary said, these days, all he talks about is China and Tibet. What do you want to talk about? So he says he wanted to talk about his religious principles. He says, all right, you can come along, but I would suggest that you do not ask him whether he believes in rebirth. Because it will be like asking the Pope if he is a Christian, if he is a Catholic. And then someone told me recently, quite recently, a couple of months ago, that he saw a video done by Dalai Lama in the States. And he says, he was asked, is there a rebirth? So he said, yes, there is rebirth, but there is nothing personal in it. There is nothing personal in it. And he gave his usual big laugh. I suppose it simply means I have to say believe in rebirth. There is nothing personal in rebirth. My basic point is there is no individual doer. In Buddha's words, deeds happen. There is no individual doer. If there is no individual doer, who will be reborn to suffer the consequences of his or her deeds in this life? Now, to close this morning show, I'll tell you a story about rebirth. You see, there was a couple. The husband and wife decided whoever remains will go to a medium and contact the other, so that once and for all we'll decide about this rebirth. You see? So the husband died first. So the wife went to a medium and contacted the husband. So he said, Harry, how are you? And Harry said, wonderful, this is a wonderful life. Sex in the morning, sex in the afternoon, sex in the evening. So the wife said, where are you? And he says, I'm a jackrabbit in South Arizona.